It's 3 a.m. in Washington, 8 in London, and 4 on a Monday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Connyoung. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. It's been almost 2 weeks now since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry disaster put the nation in a state of shock and sorrow. The number of confirmed deaths currently stands at 188, while 114 others, mostly high school students, remain missing and are presumed dead. For the latest, we go over to our Kwon Soa. She is standing by at the news center. Now, not much progress to speak of with regards to the search in recent days.
That's right, Connyoung. Rescue crews have had a hard time with the harsh weather conditions. Since yesterday, just one body has been recovered. A strong wind advisory in the area was lifted earlier in the morning, but the tides are what's causing trouble, since the underwater currents are much stronger than can be seen above the water. The visibility is also changing on a nearly hourly basis due to the foggy conditions, and that's been prompting officials to suspend searches at various times throughout the day. Now, when divers are in the water, they are mainly focusing on the 4th floor of the ferry, where most of the remaining missing are thought to be. So far, around 1/3 of the 111 cabins have been searched.
Now, earlier in the day, a video was released by authorities that shows the first moments of the rescue situation. Now, what did you learn?
Yes, Connyoung, that video is very crucial in determining how the first minutes of rescue efforts were carried out, but also in proving how the captain and the rest of the crew were among the first to flee the ship. Now, the center of attention of the nearly 10 minutes of footage taken by a member of the rescue team is the period between 9:43 a.m. and 9:49 a.m. It shows the captain of the Sewol-ho ferry, Lee Jun-seok, and his crew fleeing without attending to passengers. The captain was not wearing his uniform or pants as he was leaving the vessel with the help of the Coast Guard, meaning the rescuers had no chance to distinguish him as being the captain. By 9:35 a.m., all 15 crew members had begun fleeing the ship, but as the video shows, hardly any passengers could be seen on the deck of the ferry, which is raising criticism that the crew did not order to them to leave the ship.
Now, the prosecution's special investigative team that's probing the ferry sinking raided the Mokpo Coast Guard station earlier this morning. Now, what were they looking for?
Well, prosecutors and police investigating the case suspect officers there neglected their duties in the early stages of the rescue. The Mokpo Coast Guard has been accused of wasting precious minutes by asking a student who made the first emergency call from the ferry whether he knew the coordinates of the vessel's location. The prosecutors are also planning to expand their investigation into whether the ferry had malfunctioning lifeboats and life jackets on board, all of which were made 20 years ago. The investigators believe the products may have been used ever since they were manufactured in May of 1994. Now, this comes as earlier today, 2 lifeboats were found floating near the accident site, meaning they began to work much later than they should have. Normally, a lifeboat would deploy automatically when receiving external pressure. Investigations into the ferry operator's practical owner, Yoo Byung-on, are also continuing. Prosecutors and the police raided 4 locations this morning looking for evidence of paper companies. Now, that's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in a later newscast.
Amid the national outrage over the government's slow response to the tragedy, the president is expected to swing the axe and make sweeping changes to her cabinet. President Park Geun-hye has approved Prime Minister Chung Hyung-won's resignation, but only after the ferry disaster has been brought under control. Our Kim Hyungjun reports.
Faith in the government has eroded over the past couple of weeks due to its poor handling of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. With Prime Minister Chung Hyung-won's resignation, there's mounting speculation a large-scale reshuffling of the cabinet is on the way to appease public anger and give the Park administration fresh impetus. Political watchers say a number of high-level officials could get the chop, including Security and Public Administration Minister Connyoung, Education Minister Seo Nam-soo, and Oceans and Fisheries Minister Lee Ju-young. A number of ministers have come in for fierce criticism for their misconduct and remarks following the sinking. The ruling's Henry Party says a reshuffle will give momentum to reforms in the country to prevent a similar disaster occurring again. A parliamentary committee has decided to deliberate on 7 bills related to safety at sea, while the Henry Party plans to propose new bills to eradicate bureaucratic connections with related maritime industries. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is also preparing to unveil its own ideas on how to improve public safety. As the June 4th local elections edge ever closer, President Park's tumbling approval rating could damage the Henry Party's chances. The opposition party is expected to continue attacking the ruling party over Chung's resignation and its mishandling of the ferry disaster. Kim Hyungjun, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the rain much of the nation has been seeing did not stop thousands of people from saying their last goodbyes to the victims on Sunday and Monday. More than 6,000 people paid their respects at the additional memorial altar set up in the Seoul Plaza in front of City Hall. Now, city officials say the altar will remain in place until all of those who died in the disaster are returned to their families in Ansan. Now, starting Tuesday, an official memorial altar will be set up at Hwarang Park in Ansan, which is the city most touched by the ferry disaster. Danwon High School resumed classes for all 3 grade levels on this Monday, some 13 days after the tragic ferry accident took the lives of so many of their classmates. Now, the school will provide counseling and other psychological support services to help students grieving for their friends. Our Park Ji-won takes a look.
A grief-stricken Danwon High School resumes classes for all grades on Monday. The school has been closed since the tragic ferry accident on April 16th. Only the senior class was in school last week. On Monday, the freshman class and the 13 second-year students who did not go on the ill-fated field trip returned to a school that has suffered a devastating loss. To help students cope with the tragedy, the school offers various kinds of counseling support. The special programs will be led by dozens of psychotherapists and art therapists. The 75 second-year students who survived the disaster remain on leave, and it has not yet been decided when they will return to their studies. The decision will be made by doctors and the students' parents, who will also discuss programs for helping them cope with the loss of their classmates.
It is better for them to be together. One of the common programs in a situation like this is to have a camp for the students.
The parents of the surviving students plan to have their children participate in such a healing program, which will be staffed by therapists, medical doctors, and education experts. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Connyoung. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
North Korea is ramping up tensions on the Korean peninsula, saying there is no hope for inter-Korean relations. This comes after the leaders of South Korea and the United States vowed to respond firmly to any North Korean provocation. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea has labeled inter-Korean relations hopeless in its first official reaction to last week's summit between South Korea and the United States. On Sunday, North Korea's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Korea, which handles cross-border affairs, bluntly criticized President Park Geun-hye, calling her a wicked traitor and a despicable prostitute selling off the nation. It said the outcome of President Obama's trip to South Korea clearly justified North Korea's determination to counter the U.S. by force and settle the conflict with an all-out nuclear showdown. South Korea's Unification Ministry said North Korea's rhetoric was a violation of an inter-Korean agreement to stop cross-border slandering reached in February. Following Friday's summit talks in Seoul, the South Korean and U.S. leaders vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against any North Korean provocation. North Korea has been ratcheting up tensions lately, following its threat last month to conduct a new type of a nuclear test. Recent satellite imagery has shown increased activity at the regime's nuclear test site. South Korea, the U.S., and Japan are concerned the upcoming test could be larger than North Korea's 3 previous tests. The latest rhetoric out of Pyongyang comes as North Korean leader Kim Hyungjun revealed plans on Sunday to develop the regime's military prowess for a confrontation with the United States. Experts view the recent escalation in tensions as Pyongyang's attempt to justify itself ahead of its 4th nuclear test. South Korea's defense ministry said last week the North warned of something big and unimaginable for its enemies before April 30th. Kwon Soa, ARIRANG News.
A confidant of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is quickly gaining power within the ranks of the ruling elite, so much so that there is speculation that he could soon become the regime's 2nd most powerful man. North Korean state media reports that Hwang Byung-seo has been promoted to the rank of vice marshal. That puts Hwang on the same level as Choi Dong-hae, the top political officer in the North Korean People's Army, widely regarded as the North's 2nd most powerful figure. Hwang's promotion comes around 2 weeks after a similar promotion to a first vice director of the Organization and Guidance Department, which is also one of the most powerful posts in the North. Hwang has been one of Kim Jong-un's closest aides since Kim was officially tapped to succeed Kim Jong-il in 2010. And moving on, China has unveiled a set of documents revealing crimes committed by the Japanese military, including sexual enslavement during its invasion of China. The newly published book called Irrefutable Evidence comes at a time of sour relations between Beijing and Tokyo. Here's Kim Min-ji with the details.
China has released once confidential documents revealing acts of extreme brutality committed by the Japanese military during its invasion of China, including the sexual enslavement of women and the Nanjing massacre. China's Jilin Provincial Archives released 89 documents, which consist of letters written by Japanese soldiers, newspaper articles, and other military files. The documents have been put together into a book titled Irrefutable Evidence. The Beijing News said 25 documents showed women forced into sexual slavery were from China, South and North Korea, as well as a number of South Asian countries. Another Chinese media outlet said the documents show that the total number of comfort women came to about 400,000, half of which were Chinese, while more than 140,000 were from the Korean peninsula. It added that one comfort woman had attended to 178 Japanese soldiers in just 10 days at a comfort station in Nanjing. In regards to the Nanjing massacre, the Beijing News noted that a Japanese newspaper reported that the Japanese military killed some 85,000 people in just 3 days. It added that Japanese military files showed that the population of Nanjing fell to 335,000 from roughly 1 million between December 1937 and January the following year. One letter showed a soldier referring to killing the people as slicing bean curds. Other documents were related to the transfer of prisoners to the notorious Japanese military unit 731, where brutal experiments on living people were carried out. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, there are no signs of tensions letting up. In the latest development, pro-Russia rebels took 8 European observers hostage over the weekend and has since released one on medical grounds. Now, this as the West prepares for more economic sanctions against Russia for its intervention in Ukraine. Here's ARIRANG News Shin Se-min with more.
Pro-Russian rebels have freed one of 8 European military observers they've taken hostage in eastern Ukraine, citing medical reasons, but stated they had no plans to release the other 7. Earlier Sunday, all 8 marched out in public under armed guards for the first time and said they weren't being mistreated. The separatists say they'll release a group of observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in exchange for releasing some of their own jailed activists. The West has criticized the group's capture, and Moscow has said it is ready to help secure their release, but hasn't yet taken action. The abductions coincide with the U.S. announcing new economic sanctions on Russia for its engagement in Ukraine. They will target Moscow's defense industry. Deputy U.S. National Security Advisor Tony Blinken said Sunday that the latest sanctions will exercise additional pressure on the corporate officials closest to Russian President Vladimir Putin. It's part of a greater effort among the group of 7 nations to punish Russia for its move on Ukraine. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Well, this won't come as much of a surprise, but as of last year, China's economy dwarfed Korea's. According to data compiled by Korea's central bank, Korea's GDP in 2003 stood at $680 billion, while China's was at $1.6 trillion. Now, that's just about 2.5 times bigger than Korea's. But 10 years later, in 2013, the gap had grown substantially. While Korea's economy had grown to $1.3 trillion, China's had expanded to nearly 7 times that, to $9.2 trillion. The gap between Korea and Japan, however, has gone the opposite direction. In 2003, Japan's GDP was about 6 times larger than Korea's, and this had narrowed to 5 times as large as of 2012. Well, Korean food and drink, one drink at least, is beginning to take British supermarkets by storm. According to an article in the British daily The Times, sales of the Korean distilled liquor soju have increased by 42% at Waitrose supermarkets compared to last year. Now, it says sales have been boosted by Korean rapper Psy, who described soju as his best friend in recent commercials. Chinese cabbage used to make kimchi, as well as sesame seeds and tofu, are also flying off the shelves as shoppers look for healthy meal options. The spike in sales come amid predictions Korea could become one of the world's top 10 food exporters by 2030. Well, some new figures are casting a cloud over the prospects of Korea's moderate pace of economic recovery. The profitability of the nation's companies fell to the lowest in 10 years in 2013. The Bank of Korea said Monday that the average ratio of operating profit to sales stood at 4.6% last year. Now, this is down 0.2 percentage points from 2012. That is the lowest since 2003, when the central bank started to compile the related data. The 4.6% ratio means that for every $10 of sales, the company made profits of 46 cents. Removing the nation's 2 most profitable companies, Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motor, the figure fell even more last year by 0.4 percentage points to 3.4%. U.S. President Barack Obama was in Seoul on a 2-day visit, the second leg of his Asia tour, last Friday and Saturday. Well, President Park Geun-hye sat down with her U.S. counterpart for a bilateral summit on the first day of the U.S. leader's visit, where the two discussed various issues ranging from North Korea's nuclear threat, economic ties, as well as Korea's recent ferry tragedy. Let's take an in-depth look, and for that we have our regular contributor, Dr. Kim Hyungjun, joining us live in the studio. Welcome back to the studio, Dr. Kim.
Thank you.
Now, we saw on the second day of President Barack Obama's tour to Seoul, he met with business leaders of Korea where he invited Korean businesses to invest in the U.S. And he also pressed for key bilateral trade issues.
Right, he did indeed. This Saturday meeting, as you mentioned, key economic leaders, economic community leaders, such as the head of Korea Chamber of Commerce, Korea International Trade Association, as well as Federation of Korean Industries were all there, together with head of Hyundai Motor Group, Jung Mong-gu, and Lee Jae-young, son of Chairman Lee of Samsung, and also Cho Yang-ho, head of Hanjin Group, and several other very prominent figures. There he strongly encouraged Korean business to invest more in the United States, but at the same time, as you mentioned, there were several issues that he emphasized in terms of Korea needing to do more in terms of having more of fair ground for kind of bilateral trade. One key issue was rule of origin issue about the products that are being shipped across the border here under the FTA arrangement. The United States has been complaining that Korean requirement for identifying rule of origin has been too cumbersome, and they wanted to simplify them. And actually, at the meeting right before that day, the summit meeting, both leaders of the countries agreed on simplifying the procedure. So they got one thing that they want. And there are other trade issues that remain on the table between the two countries, and then President Obama was pushing for resolving those together. One includes the issue of carbon emissions surcharge for larger passenger cars, and also government subsidy for the smaller cars that emit less carbon. And the United States side believes that's one of the barriers for greater trade between the two countries. And also Korea's restriction of foreign investors in agricultural sector, the restriction that discourage any investment over 50% of ownership of agricultural entity, that's also being talked about as one of the problems. There are other things, but the thing is, it looks like the overall discussion between the two teams, the Korean government and the United States government during this summit meeting was rather productive, they say.
Right. What about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? We know that President Park Geun-hye and President Obama actually discussed this issue as well.
Right.
Are we going to see things speeding up for the Korean side in terms of TPP agreement negotiations?
That is certainly the hope on the side of the Korean government. But the thing is, I think there are still issues remaining. Before the summit, or before President Obama's visit here, United States side was emphasizing that further strengthen the implementation of the currently existing bilateral FTA itself will be an important vehicle for Korea to move on to TPP, to join the TPP negotiations. And they're saying there are other things that need to be worked out in this complicated process of the United States negotiating with 11 other participants here. The Korea was hoping that United States and Japan would work out their differences so that TPP negotiation would speed up and Korea could join. The thing is, however, in Japan, the discussion between President Obama and Abe were not very productive. Obviously, President Obama was not happy with Abe's words, and they couldn't make much progress. So they're saying, even though the plan has been that the current participants of negotiation was to wrap up the overall negotiation by the end of the year, but there seems to be growing doubts, and Korea is working hard to find the right timing and moment to jump into the negotiation.
Now, in addition to economic issues, of course, a key agenda material on the table for Presidents Park and Obama was, of course, security issues. Now, we can say the assessment on the security discussion has been quite positive.
Right, indeed. This is another important issue for Korea's business community, as well as those people who are doing business joining from overseas as well, security in Korea. And what Korea really wanted to have this time was to have a strongest possible reassurance from the United States. And President Obama made it very, very clear that extended deterrence, meaning treating Korea as a part of United States territory if there is a case of threats from North Korea. He said the United States is not going to hesitate at all in terms of using its force, to defend South Korea. So I think that was the best possible reassurance that everybody here, including foreign business community, was looking for. So we got it.
Right, right. As for an approach to North Korea and North Korea's nuclear threats, critics have been arguing that there seems to be no new approach to that. What's your take?
Indeed, with talks about a possible six-party negotiation being revived and all that kind of stuff, there was a high expectation about some kind of new approach being introduced. But the thing is, the way I see it, this is a very much of an interactive process where North Korea will have to cooperate in order to make sure that some kind of new approach will be coming. But they were the ones who are heightening up the overall tensions with raising possibility of another nuclear weapons test and all that kind of stuff. So the timing was bad. And in response to that overall situation, what the United States and South Korea did this time was to offer clearest possible message that if there is a further provocation, it's going to go through the previous cycle of negativity, and there won't be any chance for any kind of different kind of options here. So the both country made it very clear to North Korea they should not go ahead with the nuclear weapons test. And as you reported earlier, in response to that, North Korea has introduced some once again very outrageous reaction this time. But at least we got the assurance about the firmness on our side in the United States and here as well. So I think that's the second best possible option. And in the place of some kind of peaceful dialogue mode, which obviously we're not ready to get into.
Right, and in terms of showing the world the kind of solidarity, the kind of friendly ties that the two allies have, I think this was a very good presentation by President Obama on how he expressed his condolences for the victims of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster.
Right.
So I think this was a really good representation by both leaders.
Yeah, I think there's a consensus behind that view, certainly.
All right, Dr. Kim Hyungjun, thank you so much for today.
Okay.
And that is all from us at this hour. Thank you for watching, but do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.